Hi, Linda Winter. Okay, so I want to show you the oven mitt. This little guy, it's a, I don't know, a hand oven mitt. Anyway, this is done with my 3/4 oval. There's going to be a bunch of other projects that I'll have coming with the 3/4 oval at some point, but not yet, just too busy. Okay, so when we break this down, we can see we're using Insulbright here. There's one piece there. We're going to look at how we use that a little bit later to cut this piece out. Then I have one piece here. We're going to use this to cut that piece. And then I have another piece that's a little bit larger, and we're going to use that to cut this too. Okay, so we'll take a closer look at that in a minute. Let's look at the materials. We need Insulbright. We need a square that's as big as this with Insulbright. We need another one that's as big as this for Insulbright. And if you notice, I have a piece of fabric. There's one piece of fabric that we need, again, as big as the template, another one as big as a template, and then I need a piece of Insulbright that we folded in half. And when we take a closer look, we'll look at that fold line in a second. And then I have another piece of fabric that we're folding in half. So we've got those two. You need some kind of a straight edge. This 4x16 ruler, I call it the unsung hero. I love it with that turntable that we have, our roundabout. I use this a lot more than I ever thought I did, because this guy here was my favorite tool in all the world. It still is, but I find when I'm doing smaller stuff that I go to this ruler. But any straight edge that you have. Martelli makes a new template. This guy here, we use this at the long arm, and for people that aren't so comfortable with the rotary cutter, this has a knob, and you can see by pushing down on that, I mean my table, my mat, everything's rocking. This guy, just like this, no slipping, no kidding. So we need that material, one of the rulers or something to square off. You need a rotary cutter, of course. We're going to need some double folded seam binding, and it's the single, not the wider stuff. But when we open this up, I gotta put my glasses on so I can show you. When we open this stuff up, it's folded inside, and I should have grabbed a different color besides black, but hopefully you can see the fold and the fold. Sometimes they have a single layer that's folded like that, and we don't want the wider stuff. And then you need a bunch of pins, straight pins. I love our zip guns, but the zip guns won't work for this. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the template. You can see here it says Winter Designs. Underneath the Winter Designs, there's a little hash mark here and here. Those guys are evenly spaced. We'll be using that in a minute. Then as we finish or follow the template down, there's a line here, and then place on fold. So what we're going to start out with is cutting a piece that's exactly this size. So I'm going to grab this, get this stuff out of the way, and I don't need to square off yet, because we're going to be doing exactly this template. What I do want to do is have front and back. Now you can do what I've done here, or you can do this, totally up to you. It really doesn't matter. Either way, that get a grip material is going to grab. So we're going to cut exactly what we have here. So let me line that up a little bit and then cut. If you have not used my templates before, I'm going to do this because this, actually I haven't done the other way. I'm going to recommend you do this because this grabs that piece of fabric. When I turn it the other way, the fabric slides around. So when I use the rotary cutter, you guys already know we're cutting from the shoulder, not from the boob. When we cut from the boob, the blade's at an angle. If you're new to the rotary cutter, go watch my videos on the rotary cutter. This hand is down here. Because I have that get a grip on the bottom, all those layers stay together. I'm going to cut, and I'm going to cut off. I'm going to turn the template, and I'm going to cut off. When we look at this Insulbright, this iron stuff, and it's really not an Insulbright, but like Insulbright, this iron stuff is going to protect our hands from the oven, from the heat. And then I have some batting, and then I've got, I bet that's scrim, something like that, but it's all kind of stitched together. But those layers are inconsistent. So when I go to cut, I'm just kind of turning that template. And do you see here how there's a little bit there? That's just because those 3 layers are kind of shifting. So you may have to go along and clean some of that stuff up. It's going to go in your seam allowance, so it's not like it's that big of a deal. But do you see how I'm cutting off rather than cutting around? Again, in my other videos, I show you cutting around versus cutting off. What I just did there, I cut and I turn, that's cutting around. I tend to cut off, turn, cut off, turn, cut off, and then, go around. Okay, so we've done that one piece. I'm going to finish that up. So we're going to put that stuff aside, and then we're going to grab the next. This is where we're going to do the place on fold. So I'm going to go here, and we're going to need to square this off first because, oh no, not place on fold, sorry, we're going down the template. Sorry, haven't done enough of these to have it in my head. So we did the first, it was exactly. Now we're going to move down the template. We're going to line up to that. So we want to square off the template. or square off the fabric, I should say, okay? And you can use your mat. Basically, I just need a straight edge. So I'm going to use my mat and lining up. I'm looking at my blue. Can you see I'm just a little bit off of that blue, but good enough for me to square up. I've got my nice straight edge. I don't want to move those fabrics to where they're not together anymore. I'm going to bring this over here. Now I am lining that up on my mat, and I'm using my 16 on there, and I'm going to line up the hash mark here and the hash mark over here. And depending on how you look at it, it may or may not look like it's lined up. Me looking straight down, it's lined up. I've noticed when I look at it in the camera that it's not exactly lined up. Now if you look here, do you see how I've got just enough fabric here for me to cut? If I didn't, I would move this over because I have plenty over here. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to cut off, we're going to cut off. I'm just turning that template as I go, okay? And what I'm going to do is continue to cut off, then I'll go clean this up, and there I'm cutting around. Now I'm going to go look, see how there's little pieces there? Just because, again, those 3 layers, they're not all stitched together. There's hash marks, but they're not all stitched together. So I'm going to go clean up some of that stuff. Again, the mess that's in here, it's going to be in my seam allowance, so it's not that big of a deal. What you don't want to do is what I just did, have that blade at an angle. It's going to end up cutting inconsistently. All right, so we're pretty good for that. Let's see if we've got that. And then we're going to go to our next piece. All right, so you can see I've got a little bit more there. We're going to put that aside. Now we're going to go to the folds. I want you to do these folds separately because this is a lot of fabric here. And I can promise you it's not going to be like absolutely perfect when you cut, but again, we're just getting kind of the shape. And I'm looking down. We've moved down the template, and I want to look to see that that fold line that goes all the way across the template is on the fold of my fabric. And when I get that there, I like to cut this way rather than this way, because what that allows me to do is start at the fold and I cut off, moving that template as I go. And again, I've got basically like 6 layers, and if you count this stuff in the middle, that's a whole lot that we're cutting. So all that times 2 plus the top plus the bottom. So this inconsistency that's here, it's not that big of a deal. It's part of our seam allowance. But we basically just want to get that shape. And again, you can see, if you're really like one of those perfectionists and you don't want to go back here with the rotary cutter, you can grab scissors and cut off that excess. See how that's kind of a mess there at that point? So if that's driving you crazy, then we'd go in with scissors. And I would use smaller scissors than I have right here. I don't do this at home because that is part of my seam allowance, but you get the idea. So we're going to leave that folded, and then we're going to do the same thing for this piece. Now, I'm going to show you this one, and you'll notice here I don't have a piece of fabric. When I look inside, do you see how there's silver there? So I've got silver here. This piece is optional. I'm going to show you inside this guy. We're going to flip it around, and I want to show you what I did here. I've got a lot of bulk, so I'm not going to care about doing French seams. If you're not sure of French seams, basically you sew wrong sides together, turn it, and then stitch again. Do you see how this is a raw edge? I don't care. But this one has the piece inside. I'm adding a piece inside here. This one doesn't have a piece inside. Totally up to you whether this is a practical mitt or whether this is a gift for somebody. If it's a gift for somebody, you're going to do what I'm doing here. So again, we're going to line the fabric up with that fold line that's here. So I'm looking to see, and when I think I've got that pretty much where it is, then I'm going to go cut. Okay, so we're cutting off, turning the template, cutting off. And again, you guys decide if you're more comfortable cutting around. Do you see how I'm cutting around? So you can cut like this, totally up to you. Okay, so we've got all our pieces cut. So we're going to take our pieces, and now we're going to grab our straight pins. This guy and this guy, we would pin and pin and pin and pin. We're basically going to do that. Can you see how I've got the right sides out, the right side out, so wrong sides together. So we're going to go on the silver side. The silver side has stitch lines for me. And what we're going to do is put a pin in, and put a pin in, and put a pin in. I'm just going in between my stitches that are here, and then I would do one more here. And I probably would do a pin over here, and I'd have one here. I think I have one left. Let's grab that one. but I would definitely have a pin up at the top, and I probably have a pin over here. What we want to do is go to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch following those lines, okay? So I did this without my glasses, so you can see I'm not exactly on there. You know, it's not that big of a deal, but we're going to stitch and stitch and stitch and stitch, and then we're turning and stitching and stitching and stitching and stitching. What that's going to do is basically, I don't want to say baste, but adhere these two together. We're quilting these two together, really, is what we're doing. Okay, so we've done that to this piece. We're going to do that to this piece. We're going to do that to this piece. So let's get rid of all of those. So now I've got these three. This one isn't stitched. You can see how I've done one and not the others. And oh, by the way, when you do this, this will shift. So you can see how even more so, those layers don't all stay together. So we're going to get rid of those pins, and we're going to pretend that that is all stitched together. And now let's bring this guy over. And again, this piece here would really be this piece here. Okay, so what we want to do is look at what this oven mitt looks like. When we look at this, you can see I've got my oval. My oval is going to be the mouth. So when my hand is inside of here, imagine this is turned right side out. This mouth part will be silver on the outside. That's the part that I want to take advantage of. And I don't know if you can tell, but this on my hand, my thumb is kind of right to the edge. I have a little bit of room, but what I don't want to do is have my thumb way back here. If I make this so big, I can't grab onto a pot. The whole idea of this is holding from your oven. This is oven, not microwave. You can use it with the microwave, but it can't go in the microwave. This is going to help you taking from the stove and from your oven. So I want my fingers here. I want my thumb here. I don't want to make this a whole lot bigger than it already is. Okay, so we're going to use this base. That base is what we're going to be adhering everything to. So if you look and see what I've got here, this part here is going to be down. What I want to do with this is have this piece, this is the bigger of the two, and I want to start pinning. So we're doing the fabric side and it's an Insulbright type of material, this guy here and this here together. And now we're going to take our pins. We're going to grab our pins and we're going to start pinning on the edges. So I'm going to start in the center here, and I want to grab these guys here. And if you'll notice, there's kind of a point where this is the middle of this, and you can see how this doesn't follow those lines anymore. So that's kind of where I want to pin to. I basically want to, where they don't line up anymore, is place a pin in there. All right, and I would move that over a little bit to get those edges lined up, and then I would pin over here. And then what we're going to do is go to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch starting there, stitching around. And you can see I've stitched, I used a smaller seam allowance here, I used a little bit bigger seam allowance over here. It's kind of based on your hand. If you've got a bigger hand, less seam allowance, a smaller hand, more seam allowance. But what we want to do is start stitching. And if you notice, where I'm telling you to start stitching is kind of in the middle. When we look at where this is, we're going to add that other piece in a minute. So we're going to start stitching, we're going to stitch around. When you stitch, and again, when we look at where this is, kind of, you know, folding this in half almost, you know, when we look at that and where this doesn't line up anymore, we want to lock that stitch, lock that stitch. So we stitch. Once we do that, then we're going to place this over here. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to pin, and I don't have enough pins. We're going to pin here, and we do another pin here, and we would do another pin over here. And what we're going to end up doing is, again, stitching that. Now, we haven't stitched this together, and we haven't stitched all of this together. So I want to come back to this guy here. If you look at this, once we start stitching, I want you to see I started stitching here, and then I stitched around, and then I kind of somewhere along here. I'm leaving this opening part for my hand to go in and then determine how much of this that I want to stitch. What you do want to do is line these edges up. This guy and this guy, we want to line those up. And then when we look, these should all kind of come together. And so I'm going to stitch again. We're going to stitch about here all the way around, locking those stitches in. We're going to stitch around, locking those stitches in, and then we're going to line these up. If you have to adjust this and you have to adjust this, we're adjusting for these to be even. Those to be even, and then we're going to turn this way and we're going to stitch this down. So we're stitching here and we're stitching here. When we stitch that here, I want to make sure that I've got stitches all the way around, so there's no gap here, and there's no gap here, and there's no gap in here. So let's take a look at this one. Can you see how this is all stitched around, and that's all stitched around, and that's all stitched around, and that's all stitched around? You want to test it with your hand. Stick that in there. I don't use my right hand for an oven mitt, so I'm going to swap over, and a hand does make a difference. How it feels in your hand. And also, if you're doing this for a man, you may want to add a little bit more, just a 1/4 of an inch on here, 1/4 of an inch on here, 1/2 of an inch, totally up to you. But test it out first. You know, you're probably the one that's going to be doing the cooking, honestly, using this. So you fix it for your hand. This should fit most everybody's hands to be able to feel that, but that's where we want to go. So we've stitched around. Now what we're going to do after we've done all of that is we're going to flip this right sides out, and we're going to start talking about doing the binding, I guess you could call it, the finishing edge. And this should turn pretty easily. You shouldn't need to use an iron on this because that Insulbright type material is pretty sturdy. Now what we want to do is grab that binding material, that seam binding, and 22 inches is about the max that you'll need. And again, I'm going to finagle this a little bit. We can do all that stuff later on too, though. Okay, so straight pins. I don't have any, but we're going to pretend that I've got straight pins. We're going to start in the middle back. Look at mine and see how I screwed up. Okay, I did a test one. I never used one of these before. I needed to give myself a good 3 more inches. Y'all see that gnat? I needed to give myself a good 3 more inches here. So what we're going to do is start here. And we're going to pin, and we're going to go around, and we're going to pin, and we're going to go around and around and around and around. Imagine that I've done that. And then we're going to make a loop. In that loop, you want to look at your hot pads and your oven mitts and see how much of a loop you want. If you're going to be doing this where it's hanging over your door of your oven, then you can add a button here, or you can add Velcro if you want to, so that it can kind of go over. I just stitched it down. Again, don't do what I did. What I do want you to look at, though, is this. I've stitched this part together. So we're going to stitch that close. Whatever it is that you're doing, we're going to basically cover up this raw edge that you've done here. I think you all get the idea. Hopefully that'll make sense. And then that gives you one of these really cool oven mitts that is now just a little teeny one. If you wanted to do one that's microwavable, that's microwave safe, then we're going to go to that cotton batting on here and your cotton fabric, 100% cotton batting. And oh, by the way, one of the things that I didn't say in the microwave bowl video, and I'll put it on the screen, is when you're doing embroidery. Some people put embroidery on things. You can do a monogram on here. If this was microwavable, then that fabric, cotton batting, cotton thread, 100% cotton thread. So if you're doing anything for your microwave, it has to be 100% cotton thread. Most of your embroidery thread is rayon or acrylic or polyester, so 100% cotton batting. Okay, hopefully that's going to give you enough of an idea of how to make this wonderful oven mitt. That's a whole lot of fun. It's a great gift. Do these as a set. You can do the pot holders, you can do the placemats, you can do the microwave bowls, you can do all these things as a nice little goodie. And you can sell these too. These are really great gifts. You've probably seen them all over the place. I've seen them everywhere, it seems like, and I've seen them for really expensive too. You can also add that rubbery material on there, so you can use it to open up pots and pans and jars, and not pots and pans, jars, you know, pickle jars and those kinds of things. So that rubbery material that they sell at the Dollar Tree that goes under your rugs, on your carpet, that goes under your pots and pans and those kinds of things, that grabs, you can put a layer on that here as well, so you can stitch that in. Okay, hopefully you got some good information and you'll try this out and let me know what you think. Thanks.